way, I do want to mention some crazy stuff has happened since you and I first clicked record last week. Triple H actually quote tweeted TNA last weekend in advance of the Genesis pay-per-view. He quote tweeted the official TNA account and said, "Huge night ahead for our friends at This Is TNA. Excited to watch hashtag TNA Genesis tonight live on pay-per-view." I asked Jeff Jarrett, I'll ask you, when you were with TNA, could you have ever in a million years imagined something like that? Isn't that weird?
Oh, yeah, that. I'm sorry, in my mind, I was jumping ahead to the point I wanted to make, but no, that would have, well, everything was so different then. It was a completely different universe we were all living in at that point in time. But no, that thought, even in the most optimistic and we'll call it creative frame of mind I could possibly put myself in, it would have never, my imagination wouldn't have picked up on that one.
It's interesting to see how quietly TNA has been growing too. I don't know if you saw, but they had just a monstrous crowd, a really hot crowd at Genesis. And it feels like, TNA's got a little momentum. Of course, this started more than a year ago with Scott D'Amore, but it feels like, ever since that name change back to TNA, which I know was a name that was criticized quite a bit once upon a time, it feels like they've got a little bit of momentum. And the new face of TNA is Joe Hendry. I mean, this guy has been over like Rover across the pond, as we like to say, since 2018. That was the first time I saw him. And man, the crowd was just connected to him. But he brought that act to national television here, and man, it blew up last year. My dude made the charts for a song. The music charts. And now he's the TNA world champion. Joe Hendry is the man. He's the next big thing for TNA. And I just want to get your read on everything that's happening in TNA right now, Eric.
Yeah, I'm kind of keeping an eye on things there, based on things that I read and hear. I'm not going to make an appointment to watch the show necessarily, but I do check it out and clips of it. And, about 2 months ago on this show, we talked about a new executive position that had been recently announced in TNA by Anthem. And I made the comment based on the bits of the resume that came along with this individual, and I apologize for not remembering his name. My comment was, it looks like they're poised for growth. And what are we seeing? We're seeing growth. And it's been going on since before this individual joined the company. But this is what growing your audience actually looks like. And to your point, I think TNA has a unique challenge, in a sense, when you compare it to AEW, in that when AEW launched, it was a fresh new brand. It had zero baggage. It had a tremendous amount of supporting goodwill from an audience that was desperate for an alternative. Whereas TNA, is, even with the name change, which comes with some advantages because there is legacy there, there's a library there, there's value there, and I get that. But the TNA, first of all, the name TNA was a huge mistake from the get-go from a branding perspective. And there's a fair amount of baggage that comes with that brand. Some of it deserved, much of it not, but it doesn't matter. Baggage is baggage. And overcoming that challenge, overcoming the baggage that the narrative represents, is far more difficult than starting with a clean slate with a lot of goodwill. So while we're seeing incremental growth, which is the best kind of growth, by the way, because it allows you to grow your infrastructure and your business along with it to support it, as opposed to building out too much infrastructure where people are stepping all over each other and nobody's really sure who's doing what, because you haven't grown into your shoes, so to speak. What it looks like to me is this is calculated, designed, incremental growth. This is what it should look like. And I hope and pray, literally pray, that they continue to grow successfully and incrementally and be in a viable position in terms of a wrestling franchise.
I am pulling for TNA. I'm excited for their growth, excited for what's next, but they did have a little bit of a headline on another channel on the GCW Hammerstein show on the exact same night as the TNA pay-per-view. They had a free preview show over on YouTube, a countdown show, if you will. And PCO was there. He's fresh off of a 3-year run with TNA. And after the match, he had a live microphone and had someone bring him a chair and a sledgehammer and their digital media title. And he got after it. And listen, I think this is one of the fun things about wrestling, Eric, is, you know, if you really love the dirt of wrestling, the dirt, as Jim Ross might say, channeling his best Jim Barnett, this is the sort of thing that people look for, but it did feel like, boy, this is shades of Eric Bischoff here. Let's take another promotions title and do something with it. Did you see this? What did you think of this?
I didn't see it. I certainly heard about it. And look, if it's part of a story, then very cool, because it is the kind of thing that will get people talking. It'll create buzz. It'll create interest where there might not otherwise be because of the unique nature of the events that took place. But if it's just some guy trying to get himself over and not part of a story, it'll come, it'll go, and it will end up not meaning anything. So I hope it's part of a story.
Well, another story we want to keep an eye on is the former Baron Corbin showing up in GCW. I think this was his first ever event in professional wrestling outside of WWE. He was at that Game Changer show at Hammerstein. They took down all the ropes, and he battled Josh Barnett in a Bloodsport rules match. This is normally something that you see around WrestleMania. Josh Barnett puts on a series of these grappling expositions. It almost feels like, you know, a worked shoot, maybe like the UWFI or something like that from a different generation. What do you think of, first of all, Baron Corbin doing something outside of WWE? That was cool. What do you think about the Bloodsport concept, Eric?
I mean, it's interesting, I guess. It's different. So, you know, it'll catch your eye and capture your imagination for a brief period of time. Look, this kind of thing has been tried and failed in Japan. There are people that I've talked to who have worked in Japan for many years who kind of feel like when Inoki made that shift, when MMA was starting to get really popular, and Inoki wanted to blur the lines between New Japan Pro Wrestling and MMA, that was the beginning of the end of New Japan. Now, that from executives who worked there during the time, who were in some cases still friends of mine. So these are people who have firsthand experience there. So it's kind of cool, but it doesn't represent the kind of visual dynamics that people normally associate with professional wrestling. I kind of like it personally because I've always been a fan of amateur wrestling and MMA, but it's not sustainable in terms of, consistently presenting it. But as a one-off, I think it's a great idea. And by the way, Baron Corbin, I'm a big fan of Baron's. Know him a little bit, got to work with him, talk to him a little bit while I was in WWE for a minute. An incredibly athletic guy. I mean, people don't realize what a great athlete he is and his background. So I'm happy to see him still active. He's a cool guy, and he loves to cook on his Big Green Egg. By the way, he's actually pretty good. I don't know that I'd challenge him. I would take a challenge because I'll always do that, but I wouldn't be optimistic about it. Let's put it that way.